Hi everyone, I am so excited today. We are bringing you something a bit unique, different from all the other videos. As Trevor is dancing for the Cancer Council, I really wanted to shine the spotlight on this devastating diagnosis and interview somebody that's got this amazing, inspiring cancer survivor story. Sitting here with me today is the most beautiful Julie Randall. Hi!
Hello.
Who is the author of Patient 71 and who I'm delighted that can join us today for this interview. So thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So I would like to start with, please tell me how it all began.
Okay, so almost 6 years ago, next month, I was turning 50, which I wasn't very happy about. I had a big party. I called it my 40-10.
I read that in the book, actually.
Yeah, because I thought I'd just keep going from 40-10, 40-11, 40-12 and finish out my years in my 40s. So I had a big party. It was an amazing event, and I thought the fit and healthiest I ever was. I was training for a New South Wales state level touch football tournament.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was on the Saturday night. 4 days later, or 5 days later, on the Thursday, I went into my workplace in the CBD, went out for lunch, and when I got back from lunch, I just felt weird. No, I couldn't call it dizzy because it was so much more than that. But whatever that feeling was, I knew I was in trouble. Something had happened in my head. And so I said to my colleague, I feel weird. He asked me a question, I couldn't answer it. And then I was out. I just had a massive brain seizure right there and then in the office. And that's where it all began.
That would have been so scary. So what happened straight after? Did you wake up straight away? Or?
Yeah, so I don't know how long to this day that I was out, and I've never asked my workmates what I was doing or whatever, but what ended up happening is I was sitting there and, my head was down. I felt so ill, and I just heard the paramedics calling out my name. Julie, Julie, Julie. They just kept calling my name, and I could hear them, but I couldn't actually answer them. I couldn't answer them. And, so next minute they put me on a trolley and took me out of the office, and that was it. That was the end of my career in that particular place, New South Wales Marine Rescue. Yeah, so I got taken to St Vincent's emergency.
And before that, were you perfectly healthy? Was there any signs before this at any point that this would happen?
Nothing. I felt amazing. And driving to work that day, as I write in the book, it was one of those days where I was appreciating the world and the weather and my husband, sort of, and my kids. And, my week ended on a Thursday, so everything was perfect in my world. My health, as far as I knew. Little did I know what was really going on. Yeah. That's
just awful. So you were in the emergency department, and then what happened next?
So before I knew it, my husband arrived, my daughter arrived with a boyfriend, and of course they're putting me through tests. They're telling me they needed to put me through tests, and my husband's telling me, "You're just tired. You've been celebrating your birthday for 3 weeks. You're just tired." And I'm thinking, I really want to believe you, but I think it's more serious than that. I just instinctively knew. I just knew. So on that night, that was Thursday night, I had an MRI or a brain scan, and didn't take long for the doctor to walk in and say, you basically got a brain tumour.
Oh, Julie.
Yeah, but didn't know whether it was benign or it wasn't. He seemed to think it was, his words were, "Oh, it's in a good place to get out." And so my husband's still saying it's all going to be all right and it's not going to be anything. And so then I had to stay there in the hospital that night. He went home to be with, I made him, I wanted him to be with my girls. I wanted him to be with me, but I wanted him to be with my girls because of the shock they must have been feeling. So stayed there all night in a room with 3 other very sick people, not sleeping a wink, going, what is going on? Why is this happening? And then from memory, I had also had a CT scan of my body that afternoon now, but hadn't had the results, so I didn't know the results.
And I actually remember in the book when you were having those scans that was even really difficult to go through yourself, right?
Yep. I'm totally claustrophobic. So having scans, especially in MRI, when you're pushed back in that machine, my heart starts going, and I know it's illogical. The more illogical I think it is, the worse it gets. Yeah. I think it took me a few false starts to actually have that scan, and my husband came in and, was talking me through it. And, so I got it done in the end.
So dealing with that, and then also this potential diagnosis that you didn't actually know at this point.
Right.
And so how long were you in hospital for before you were released?
So that was the Thursday night. On the Friday, it was there all day. Scott turned up in the morning. We were there all day till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
And then the doctor walked in, and with some med students with him. I think he had a couple on each side, and they sort of marched in, and he stood there, and he said, "You've got tumours in your brain, your lungs, liver, pancreas, lymph nodes." He said, "It's not good." And I think, as I said in the book, I refrained from saying, "No shit." I'm blonde, but I know that's not good.
No shit,
you don't have to tell me.
That's not good.
Yeah. So it was just,
absolutely devastating.
I remember he turned around and looked at Scott, and Scott was just saying nothing. And he said, "You're not saying much." And Scott said, "What the fuck do you want me to say?" I mean...
when your wife is there with this diagnosis.
And we've just been told that. And he thought he had a perfectly fit, healthy wife. And we're told, it's, without saying the words, he almost said, it's all over for you then and there. So,
It just goes to show how your life can just change in an instant, right? It just takes one little moment for your life to go from perfectly normal, as you said, to this devastating diagnosis and the tumours. Now, I know in your book, and I'm not sure at what point you mentioned that you went to the doctor and they said it was melanoma.
Yeah, so the thing is with cancer is you don't know what cancer you've got. They can tell you you've got malignant tumours, but they can't tell you straight away what cancer you've got until you have a biopsy.
Okay.
So I think it took another week to 10 days before I knew what I was dealing with. Yeah.
And then you went and saw this doctor?
Yeah, so it was a complicated process because I went to an oncologist, and his words were, okay, we sat down. I had my father, my sister, my husband, and we sat down at this table, and he said, "You've got melanoma." And in a split second, that's probably the worst thing he could be telling me. But then he came out with, but I think this is a good thing. They've got a pill now that melts it all away.
I remember that in the book. I couldn't believe it when I was reading that.
Yeah.
Because it was like this doctor was giving you that hope. And as you know, you're going to probably tell us now exactly what happened. So he says that. Yeah. If I'm honest, and I always go by my gut, and I did through this whole journey, something deep down said, "Listen, sister, it's not quite that simple." But I wanted to believe what he told me. My husband, my family wanted to believe what he told me. So we went home and celebrated. Naively. Well, at the time, you could have known that was going to happen. You were celebrating something that hope was there.
They've got, I wasn't in the forefront of the cancer world. I didn't know. And I'm thinking, gee, they've come a long way. They're just going to give me a pill. So then but he wanted to refer me to a professor,
Okay.
you know, who was apparently going to give me the magic pill. So a few days later, off we went over to Westmead Hospital. I walked into this room, sat on a chair, and she, stunning woman, who's now I probably class as a friend, walked in, and she had a assistant with her, and she sat down. She shook our hands, and I can't remember. I wasn't shaking hands in those days. I didn't want to meet any of those people. But she said, "You have stage 4 advanced metastatic melanoma. There's nothing we can do for you. There's no cure for what you've got." And so with that, I got up and walked over to the basin in her room, and I just started dry retching. And this gets me every time.
Yeah.
And
this is why I have lots of tissues here. It's like magic.
And I just kept saying my babies, because I had teenage daughters, and we told them I was going to be all right. I'd promised them back in the beginning, when they were so distraught. That night after hospital, I said, I promise I'm going to be all right. I promise, you know, as a mother does. And I thought, you know, how the hell am I going to do that? And then I thought I was going to be able to do it with the magic pill. And then I was told that wasn't, you know, it turns out it was a thing, but not a thing for me.
Right.
Yeah. So while I'm, you know, distraught, my husband's saying, but the doctor said there was a pill, and she sort of said, oh, look, I don't believe you're eligible for that. And she was right. And turns out even if I was, it wasn't something that saved lives on its own anyway. It was a stopgap for certain melanoma patients. Yeah.
To hear those words.
Yeah.
Just shake the life out of you, wouldn't it? It's just...
Yeah. I mean, yeah, as you can see, 6 years later, it's a tough gig.
You're still here.
But I'm here.
This is what the story is about, and this is what we're going to hear.
Yep.
So, first of all, just thank you for even sitting here and being so honest and vulnerable with me. And we've only really just met, so I really appreciate you opening up your heart and telling me how it happened. And I can see how it would still be very raw for you, but thank you. So you got those words. What happened? Then what happened when she left that doctor's office? Because it would have just...
Yeah, so she offered me chemotherapy to, you know, buy me some time. And she was going through a few other things, radiation. Her biggest concern was to get rid of the brain tumour straight away. I'm still walking around with a brain tumour, you know. So that was kind of what she focused on. And then as we were leaving, her assistant handed me a brochure on palliative care, which I politely declined and just pushed that away. And then she said, can you stay and get some bloods taken, and we need to weigh you. And I think I say in the book, the last thing I needed that morning was a bad reading on the scales. that would have really pissed me off. So we just got out of there. We just got out of there. And I was in a daze. I remember driving home and in silence for a while. And then I ended up saying to my husband, you know, I want you to be happy. You know, you have my permission to meet someone else and be happy. And then another couple of kilometres down the road, I said, actually, no, I don't. I've changed my mind. You know, I just had this pang of jealousy that he was going to, you're not getting out there meeting someone else. So, so that kind of fueled a fire as well.
Okay. This fire inside you, I have to do something.
I did. And I went up and down for a long time. But so I did go on chemotherapy because I had to do something to buy myself some time to figure out how I was going to keep this promise to my daughters and to my husband. So I sort of, I think it was 6 months into that, and I went to the doctors one day and I said, it was working, the chemotherapy, by the way. It sort of was holding things. So I was in a holding pattern.
Right.
And so I said to the doctor one day, how long is this going to work for? I didn't want to ask, but I knew I had to. And that was October 2012. And he said very nonchalantly, oh, put it this way, it won't be working in March, which was like...
Thanks, doctor, for that really nice positive statement.
Thank you. So that was I think there was 4 months between then and March. And so I just stared at the floor and I just got a bit angry and said, well, if you think I'm going to hang around and wait for that to happen, you've got another thing coming. And I'm, ranting and raving. And then Scott was asking him about, is there anything else, and trials. And he said they were doing stuff overseas. And Scott said, well, can you get us into one of those trials? And he said, no, I can't. He said, that's up to you. And so we drove home and I got on the internet and I was on the internet for hours just looking at everything that was going on and basically honed in on this clinical trial in Portland, Oregon, where they were trialling, and it was stage 1, first stage out of the rats, what's called an immunotherapy drugs. Mm-hmm. And when I read about it, and it was a drug that, trialling drugs that kick the immune system into action to fight the cancer. So basically your body's learning to fight the cancer again. And that just made sense to me. Once again, my gut's going, Julie, that's what you need. That's what you need. So it wasn't going to be easy though, as nothing seemed to be. But so I called, I think the next morning, and I spoke to a clinical nurse. I'd seen the name who was on the internet, who was in charge, and I thought it was a girl. His name was Chris, but I don't know why, but it wasn't. It was a guy. And he actually, I think I left a message. The timing might have been out for here in America. And he actually called back, like the next morning. I couldn't even believe he called back. And he sort of humoured us and said, he seemed to be quite sort of intrigued that us Australians had called to be part of the trial.
So he didn't completely shut you off?
He didn't completely shut me off. In fact, he sounded quite positive, and he sounded quite positive about some of the results they were getting out of these trials. But then the rejection started.
Right.
Yeah. So then it was, the trial was closed at 70 patients. They couldn't take any more. It was only for US citizens. What if I got sick? And I wouldn't stay for 2 years. The trial was for 2 years. There was just so many rejections. But every time I would just overcome them, and I'm offering this guy, you can stay in our house in Australia and my husband will give you surfing lessons, and anything I could to try and coerce this guy. So, but there was just no after no after no, and finally 3.5 months later, like, we sent money over. We just went, okay, well, if I get sick, here's the money, 20 grand, put that in your bank account. And I think the final deal was because I actually called up one day and quoted the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take, that if they can help you, if they think they can help you, they're obliged to do so. And I think it's 2 days later.
How did you find out about that? Was that just a fluke where it came into your life and you read this and then you thought that's what
I always knew about the Hippocratic Oath for some reason. I think hypocrisy of, I can't remember how I knew that, but I just knew it. And
amazing.
And Scott wasn't a fan. My husband said, "Don't do it."
Don't do it. And you're like, I want to do anything to stay alive.
Yeah,
right?
I don't think he still knows because he hasn't read the book. So
have you not read the book?
No, it's too hard.
Right, there's just too much.
My daughters haven't read the book.
Right.
My sisters haven't read the book.
Okay.
Anyone really close.
Find it.
Yeah.
Have you read the book?
I wrote it.
But have you no?
No. I mean, I've read it lots of times when we were doing the edits. So it's safe to say. I've opened it up a couple of times if I've been writing an article or something, and literally it's like, did I write that? Yeah, it's great.
You maybe in some kind of bubble when you read it as well.
It just kind of flowed out. Yeah.
I just actually moved that. Okay.
Right.
So I remember when I was reading that part in the book, and I don't want to give too much away, but the journey that you took me on was just inspirational in the sense that that was a real pivotal moment, right? Where I felt like I was there with you and I was championing you to get onto that trial. And the moment that you did in the book, felt like just having a happy dance, you know? And because you write it so beautifully and so eloquently that I'm reading and I feel like I'm there with you. And that's why I was on this journey, with emotions as well, you know? And it's a beautifully written book. But at that point, I remember just thinking, yes.
Yeah.
And I bet you felt the same.
Yeah, well, I did. And I got a call, 3.5 months into this mammoth campaign to stay alive. And every day I'm getting closer to the time they told me, you've got 6 to 9 months to live. I'm past the 6 months at this stage.
Yes.
So when I got that call to just say, what time do you want your appointment with Dr. Erba, who was the head doctor, I was like, it was the old phone, that you had in your home in those days. And I was like, so, it just goes to show you if you just don't take no for an answer,